We are in for a special treat today because we have Reverend Scott Planting as our speaker. Many of you know Scott because he has been our Adult Formation Sunday morning host. Yeah, during the fall, which has been an absolute joy to have you here with us, Scott. Thank you so much. For those of you that follow along with the Climbing Tree podcast, the most recent episode actually involves an interview with Scott. And he shares, I know this is a little reveal here, but he shares that one of the people that's inspired him the most is Wendell Berry. Oh. And so I want to read a very short Wendell Berry quote in honor of you and your presentation here before Scott leads us in prayer. But I actually was reading this book of poems this week and saw this, and it was after we had discussed, and it was like Providence. And so knowing that we are soon going to have a class on hope, which is not necessarily about joy, but this is from Wendell Berry. And Wendell Berry says, "Be joyful though you have considered all the facts." What a Berryism, right? And so, friends, without further ado, I am thrilled to present to you today, all of you online as well, the Reverend Scott Planting.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It is an honor to be here today. I moved here about a year ago, and the reason I lived in Maine for 45 years, served two parishes in that time. I served parish in Western Maine near Mr. Mosier's, his dad. This is really, you're one of the first people who about a year ago called me up and said, "I know who you are." In Western Maine, it was a cooperative parish of about a dozen churches. I served 3 of those churches and had responsibility for the overall operations. And I had a parish of 500 square miles, big area. Wow. And I had 3 services every Sunday, 9, 11, and 2:30, and a youth group in the afternoon. That was my life. And then in 2010, I was called to serve the Maine Seacoast Mission, which was at that point located in Bar Harbor. It's now in Northeast Harbor. And the Seacoast Mission, old distinguished organization, and it operates a boat called the Sunbeam. We're actually on Sunbeam number 5 right now. It's a 76-foot steel-hulled 3-deck boat that provides health care, spiritual care, and community services to the outer islands off down East Maine. So I went from a car traveling around the roads of Western Maine to a beautiful boat in the North Atlantic Ocean, which was pretty cool. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. And then the reason I'm here now is my wife lives over at Silverado Memory Care Community. She has Alzheimer's, and so we're here. So, and this church, my daughter lives a couple blocks away, came here for the baptism of some friends' kids, and then came to a funeral service just about a year ago of one of her dear friends. And she said, "Dad, you got to go meet the people over at this church." And I did. And Larry Hayward, so funny. It's almost like we've got an old Presbyterian minister sitting there. To keep him out of our hair, we have to find things for him to do. So here I am with things to do. Good morning. And so I'd like to begin with a prayer. This is the prayer of Sir Francis Drake, which is a prayer that we used aboard the Sunbeam quite a bit when we were out providing care to islands. Let's pray. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrive safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity. And in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly to venture on wider seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen.
Where's that prayer? Can you send that to us?
No.
Okay.
Yes, it's the prayer of Francis Drake, sure, of course. So our theme is hope in times of crisis. And obviously, I think fear, probably more than hope, is characteristic of our time. We, I think, are confronted everywhere with crises, mass shootings in Lewiston, Maine, long war in Ukraine, horrific struggle between Israel and Gaza, pandemic, economic displacement, climate change, seemingly unsurmountable political turmoil, and whatever else is just around the corner. I think in the midst of all this uncertainty, we tend to pull inwards. We would tend to withdraw. Our problems seem simply too large, too insurmountable. Hope seems impossible. Fear feels overwhelming. So what I want to do briefly today is I want to consider the New Testament understanding of hope from the Apostle Paul. I want to talk about what it means when people lose hope, when despair sets in. And I want to talk about a story of people who found hope, the Crow Indians, described in Jonathan Lear's book, Radical Hope. I want to talk about a few of my stories of hope and hear your stories of hope. The Apostle Paul wrote some of the most memorable, well-known lines. He said, "For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience." And as a kind of illustration of that hope, I have Emily Dickinson's poem. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all, ready to take us on its wing to some future good. I think, in fact, hope is a thing that has already taken us to the good. The tune that it sings. In hope, or perhaps by hope, we were saved, as Paul writes. In hope, a future good, which isn't yet, somehow already is. A future good we cannot see, which waits in darkness, still shapes our entire existence. As Paul says, we might be suffering or experiencing hardship, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, or sword. And yet we have been saved, and we are saved. Interpreting this phrase, "in hope we are saved," Martin Luther suggested in his lecture on Romans that just as love transforms the lover into the beloved, so hope changes the one who hopes into what is hoped for. The key feature of hope is that it stretches a person into the unknown, the hidden, the darkness of unknown possibility. For Paul, this can happen because God is with us, God who gives life to the dead and calls into existence things that do not exist. So maybe a simple working definition for hope is the expectation of good things that don't come to us as a matter of course. Let me make a distinction between hope and optimism. Optimism, I think, is based on extrapolations we make based on the future, based on what we reasonably understand to be tendencies in the present. It's like forecasting the weather. The present contains the seeds of the future, and if it is well with these seeds, the future will grow, will be good as well. That's reasonable optimism. Hope is different. Hope is not based on accurate predictions about the future from the character of the present. The hoped for future is not born out of the present. The future good, that is the object of hope, is a new thing. It comes from outside the situation. As Emily Dickinson said, hope is like a bird that flies from outside and perches in the soul. Optimism in difficult situations reveals, I think, an inability to understand what's going on or an unwillingness to accept it. And sometimes optimism can lead to being foolish or weak. In contrast, hope in hard times, hope notwithstanding the situation, is a sign of courage or strength. The opposite of hope is despair. Aquinas called despair the greatest sin. Despair detaches us from God's story. Say, nothing in it is for me. Hope helps us press on with determination and courage. When we hope, we always hope against reasonable expectations. And that's why Emily Dickinson's bird of hope never stops singing in the sore storm, the chilliest land, the strangest sea. We are most in need of hope under a challenge or threat we cannot control. Yet it is in those situations that it is most difficult for us to hold on to hope and not give ourselves over to despair. That's when patience and endurance come in. Paul wrote, if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Patience here is better translated as endurance, patient endurance. And neither patience or endurance are popular emotions or skills. When Paul says in Romans that if we hope, we wait with endurance, implies that hope generates endurance because we hope we endure present suffering. Hope needs endurance, and endurance needs hope. The New Testament theologian Jürgen Moltmann, where I got a lot of this stuff, writes, without endurance, hope turns superficial and evaporates when it meets first resistance. In hope, we start something new, but only endurance helps us persevere. Hope and endurance are rooted in the character of God. Paul again writes in Romans, for those who believe in that God, the God of the hope of Israel, are able to be steadfast and endure situations they cannot change and in which no good future seems to be in sight. But more than just endure, Paul writes, kind of like what Wendell Berry said, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. In the midst of affliction, the God of hope opens us up for the possibility of joy and well-being. The God who creates out of nothing, the God who makes the dead alive, this God justifies hope that is unjustifiable. That's the New Testament word. As I said, I served 2 hardscrabble parishes in rural Maine for a long time. I led a cooperative parish that was located just about an hour north of Lewiston, where the shootings were last week. And after that long ministry, I was called to serve the Seacoast Mission in Washington County, the easternmost county in the US. Both communities had faced enormous loss. I witnessed people lose their identities. When farming, fishing, woods, and mill work shrank or disappeared altogether, people no longer valued themselves for what they could do with their hands or contribute to their communities. And pride in woods work or setting a fishing trap line is no longer a vocation, where traditional land and sea vocations are diminished or lost. What do? People, communities face cultural devastation. I remember walking through the pastures and orchards on the hilltop farm of Colby Atwood. I had gone out to Colby's house and I met with their sons and their families. We sat around an oak kitchen table the day after Colby died in the 90s. I was having a hard time getting this family to talk about their father at his funeral the next day. As one of the sons said, and this is an expression I've heard about 1,000 times, well, most of what we could say about our father, he couldn't say in church. And when the eldest son, Richard, pushed back, stood up, said, the only way to know my father is to walk the farm. And that's what we did. Mm-hmm. From the hilltop, we looked down on the village of Phillips, Maine. Richard told me that in the days of his growing up, Phillips had been a robust community. Schools, churches, shops, a doctor's office, water-powered mills, even a hotel for sports from away who came up to go fishing. Men working in the woods cut trees for nearby sawmills or delivered them to the narrow gauge railroad that hauled them to paper mills south on the Androscoggin River. Colby himself once told me, doing the same kind of walk, about landing in the Philippines during World War II, and there on a loading dock, he saw stacks of wooden crates filled with apples, and the crates were stamped Atwood Orchards, Phillips, Maine. That day, as we looked across these grown pastures and this old orchard, below the town of Phillips, Richard hung his head and looked away. It's all gone. It's all gone. This once proud village, home to 1,000 souls, was only a sad shell of what remained. All these tears in the common fabric of life are seen in the sadness on people's faces. A friend said to me, you want to see the face of a rural community, look into the eyes of a man or woman who has just auctioned off the dairy herd. It's been in their family for a century. Or in Wallace Stegner's haunting phrase, it's the look of people in the last stage of unsuccess. Communities I served faced cultural devastation. People lost hope. I learned the phrase cultural devastation thanks to a sermon Larry preached several months ago called Problems and Struggles. And he made reference to a book, Radical Hope, by Jonathan Lear, Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation. Jonathan Lear teaches philosophy at the University of Chicago. The book describes what I witnessed in Maine. I want to talk about it. Out of unbearable loss, a vision of radical hope. The book is about what happens when a culture dies. The subject of the study is the Crow Indian tribe in the Western United States, who were more or less pressured to give up their hunting way of life and enter a reservation in eastern Montana near at the end of the 19th century. The issue was not genocide. Many Crow people survived, but their culture was gone. Lear takes as his basic text a statement by the tribe's last great chief, Plenty Coups, describing what had happened to his people. When the buffalo went away, the hearts of my people fell to the ground, and they could not lift them up again. After this, nothing happened. The book is about those last 4 words. After this, nothing happened. Crow culture was bound up in buffalo hunting and war necessary to maintain sufficient territory for hunting. All matters of excellence in life and honor were revolved around these activities. The concept of coup, as in coup d'etat, was central. Crow coups involved bravery on the battlefield against other tribes, Sioux, Arapaho, Cheyenne. When the warrior in the face of the enemy put a special stick in the ground called a coup stick, This was a sign to the foe of a line that he dare not pass because it would be defended to the death by the Crow warrior. The highest honor belonged to those who made a large number of coups against their enemy, hence the chief's name, Plenty Coup. But what happens when the Crow were reduced on their reservation, where neither hunting nor war was any longer possible? Something drastic occurred. It was no longer possible even to try to defend one coup stick, because nothing one did could have such meaning. The actions that gave life to a culture no longer have meaning. The world breaks down. After this, nothing happened. We find it hard to grasp in our world the full impact of such devastating cultural loss. If we move around so much from one thing to another, we make a virtue of the kind of flexibility that enables people to change jobs, professions, and skills. We have no idea what it means to have a culture collapse. The situation was quite different in a society like the Crow. There are no alternative careers waiting for an ex-warrior. Can't go off and go do something else. It's a real loss of the concepts with which you construct your lives. The cultural death I witnessed in rural Maine, though much less radical than those the Crow confronted, contain the same loss of meaning. Our children are encouraged to seek livelihoods elsewhere rather than investing their gifts locally. There was no stay option for our children, no way to build a meaningful future at home. When I was working for the Seacoast Mission, we had a very large scholarship program. And I battled with our board of directors, who are primarily people from away, who just did their message for the scholarship was, well, we got to tell the kids to leave. There's nothing here for them. Made me crazy. What a message to tell kids. There's nothing here. You got to leave. Got to go out. So is there any way out of this impasse in which everything that makes up your life loses meaning? Lear believes it requires finding something in one's own culture or tradition that would enable one to draw new meaning from old definitions that are no longer appropriate. The great chief Plenty Coup was able to help bring about this kind of redefinition by drawing on the established practice for young men, young Crow men, where they would go out when they were like young teenagers, and they would go out into the wilderness to seek a revelation, a vision through a dream. And they brought that back to the elders, and they would talk about it. The dream he told of foretold the end of the Crow way of life, but also promised a kind of survival for the Crow, provided that they listen like the chickadee. That is, to observe and find new ways of going on. The chickadee had this huge central importance in their culture. There were at the time wholly unknown. He didn't know what they were doing, but the dream was the basis for the hope that somehow the Crow way of life might continue in a yet to be defined new form. This is what Lear calls radical hope. Hope can exist if you are uncertain about the desired outcome. If it's a sure thing, it isn't hope. The very shape of this hope remained to be determined. The dream told Plenty Coup that the old standards of courage were going to lose their validity, and yet they would not be left completely adrift in a world without meaning and direction. New standards would emerge if they learn to watch and observe like the chickadee. Lear writes, what makes this hope radical is that it is directed toward a future goodness that transcends the current ability to understand what it is. Radical hope anticipates a good for which those who have hope as yet lack the appropriate concepts with which to understand it. What sustained hope for the coup, for the Crow Indians? They saw themselves under the protection of God, really clear about that. And Lear writes, it is beyond question that the hope was a remarkable human accomplishment, in no small part because it avoided despair. Or despair again. Lear sees the avoidance of despair as the necessary condition in which a community can respond creatively to cultural death. It's only this kind of creative response from within, one that draws on the community's resources and tradition to come up with a new understanding of the ends of life. Listening to the chickadee. Chief Plenty Crow led the crow to abandon their nomadic hunting life and settle down as farmers. Many Coup said, our decision was reached not because we loved the white man who was already crowding other tribes into our country, or because we hated the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, but because we plainly saw that this course was the only one which might save our beautiful country for us. That was the dream. Lear believes many Coup displayed courage and interesting moral imagination to move towards things we don't fully understand and to seek the good in a world full of risks, to go forward, to act vigilantly under uncertainty instead of acting impulsively and brashly. Lear says, take steadfast courage. Courage that is responding to the situation based in reality, not wishful thinking. Lear concludes with the hope that comes from his account of the Crow Society, that people can find the resources to come back from a virtual dead end and invent a new way of life in some creative continuity with the one that has been condemned, as the Crow did in embracing settled agriculture. This hope is radical because it is virtually impossible to say beforehand what the shape of the new kind of life will be. The parallels between what Lear describes as radical hope and our own biblical tradition are very abundant. I think of the cultural devastation endured by Israel during the period of the exile. During this time of incredible upheaval, the prophet Jeremiah comes up and he warns his people who are very complacent about everything just fine, I think, by wearing an ox yoke. And when the worst has fallen, when their land has been destroyed, he buys land. That's radical hope. After reading this book, I had sort of an epiphany. Always good to have epiphanies every now and then. Looking back on those years in rural Maine, I realized that the two organizations I work, Mission at the Eastward and the Maine Seacoast Mission, were fundamentally committed to hope. That's what we were about in our best moments. We stayed put. We endured. We dealt honestly with the reality of the situation our communities faced. We were imaginative and we did things. And we always held to God's promise of a new day. So the book really helped me define what's been my life and the ministry that I've been part of. So turn to some stories. I served a church in the village of North New Portland, Maine. Go home and look up North New Portland, Maine in Somerset County in West Central Maine. It was a beautiful, tall, steepled, white clapboard church with clear glass windows. It was built in 1860. And it reflected the prosperity of North New Portland as a logging town, crossroads, a mill town. We had that was my 2:30 service. I had a family that fed me. That was hope. I had a family that would feed me lunch in between. We had maybe 20 members on the rolls. But the ministry was literally to everyone. Patrick, again, your prayer today is a prayer that I have prayed 1,000 times, often at gravesides in these communities.
Come to the 11 o'clock service.
Yeah. And the church, it was hard. We worked so hard to maintain that church, to keep it open. Jeez. And it was hard, just everything, everything was hard. And just when I was there, the school closed, the post office closed, all sort of the institutions that sort of hold a community all went away. One Sunday, I climbed up in the belfry to ring the bell with my dear friend, Elder Bertrand Dyer. And looking north from our very high perch to this huge expanse of unbroken woods, Bertrand kind of looked out and he said, you know, this town was once the gateway to all this, to the North Woods. That was it. That was like another epiphany. We climbed down, began the after service, and I welcomed the congregation saying, this is the gateway, it just hit me, to the upper Kennebec River Valley. And from that day forward, I made everybody say that as we started church every Sunday, whatever we did. Welcome to the gateway of the upper Kennebec River Valley. And then we tell a story. There's nothing like Western Maine in all of the United States. 575 mountains, over 1,000 feet in elevation, 960 lakes, 8 million acres of forest land, hundreds of miles of outstanding rivers, a rich architectural and historical heritage stretching back to pre-colonial times, and a people whose character and commitment sustain them in good times and bad. We said that over and over and over. They thought I was crazy. And we did things. Great brook trout and landlocked salmon fishing up in the rivers. You know what we did? We started an angler's worship service where we worshiped the brook trout. And we got all of these sports and all these people came, and we would have fly casting lessons and really good food. People loved it. We started we hosted a music festival. All these people, we had a huge housing rehab program, and all these people would come up and say, well, we love it here. So I would say, like the Mosers, well, why don't you retire here then? People actually took me up. That was really scary. It was all crazy, but it gave us a way to think about the future beyond despair that gripped so many of our lives. It gave us hope. Moving on to the down east coast of Maine. Drive along Route 1 heading east. Once you get past Bar Harbor and Acadia National Park, entering Washington County, it's just the same story. Shells of once prosperous towns. Much of the fishing, the sardine canning factories, the agriculture, blueberries, logging. Fishing now means lobsters. And more, that is vulnerable to global warming. The old timers would talk about the abundant fishing grounds where season by season they would fish for cod and flounder and haddock and shrimp and dig clams. All just one thing now, lobsters. And to this devastation, I know this great fisherman in Stonington, Maine. Stonington, another good place to look up. He said this: imagine a place that can sustain itself fishing forever. Imagine 150 miles of Maine coast and 50 fishing communities where fishermen and people in those communities take an active part in caring for the rivers and coves and the mud and the seaweed, and beyond that, the fish and habitat on the bottom of the ocean that they can't even see. I would like you to imagine a place where fishermen themselves play a lead role in the stewardship of the rivers and the ocean that sustain them. Right now in Eastern Maine, this vision could be a reality in the next 10 or 20 years. Healthy, prosperous, small islands and coastal communities where local people take an active part in the well-being of their homes, fishing forever. That's the vision I wanted to give to the kids that we cared for, not sending them away someplace. I wanted them to be part of that. this vision of fishing forever actually earned this guy a MacArthur Genius Award. It's hope to hold on to, and from it comes action, real things to do. You know what alewives are? That's something you can look up. Alewives are fish about that long that go up these rivers, and they spawn, they come back. Turns out a cod, which are almost all entirely gone, spawn in really distinct places out in the Atlantic Ocean offshore. They're not everywhere, they're just here or they're here. And it turns out that those places, if you go upstream, you go into there's a river nearby where alewives used to come and go. So there's a reason for all that. That's what this guy who won MacArthur Award, he figured all this stuff out. So the problem was the rivers had become polluted, they were dammed, so the fish couldn't come up and go. So what these folks are doing, what we sort of helped with, let's clean up the rivers, get the dams out, clean them up. Alewives are coming and going, and you know what's coming back? Codfish, not in jillions like there used to be, but coming back. Really, so, and again, so what we did with kids, we ran these big after school programs. We had kids stock rivers with little baby alewives by the millions. We just took them all out of school, with buckets of alewives, put them all back. And it's hope. So finally, hope is not something we possess as in be hopeful. It's a practiced way of life. An action rooted in the conviction that life is fundamentally good. Hope is a verb more than a noun. Hope is a choice, becomes a practice. The stories of people who inspire hope in others teach us that hope and action are inseparable. Rebecca Solnit, really good book called Hope in the Dark, writes, hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. The hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future makes the present inhabitable. So what I ask you to do, I want you all have stories of hope. And just don't be, because all the bad news, just well, that doesn't matter. You gotta tell your stories. They make a difference and they can activate hope for change. Conclude with beloved words of Reinhold Niebuhr. Nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in a lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we must be saved by love. Thank you.
I think there's a hymn that says, "Oh God, our help in
Ages past, our hope for years to come." Yes, good, thank you.
And actually, I remember that during the war, and when it's, or at least I thought it was written about World War II, because there was a line about save us from the sheltered blast, or words like that, and I just saw the little bombs coming down. So
good.
Could you make more of a distinction between faith and hope?
I knew someone was going to ask that. That's a good, Patrick, how would you answer that? That's a good question. Faith, hope, and love.
Well, I would say
The three virtues.
faith affixes that hope to God.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a
Yeah.
That's my first answer. I'm going to sit with that. I don't know if that's the answer, but that is where I start.
Yeah.
That hope can be generalized, right? But faith is our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come. We say that in faith because we name God who led the Israelites through exile, who emptied the tomb, built a church from broken people. I mean, that's so it's,
I think they're really close. They sort of, the sense of hope I talk about is based on a loving God who creates and gives us a future.
Well, I think of hope as involving our activity within that concept. But faith has to do with God,
Mhm.
and God, is the one that gives us the gift of faith.
Thank you. That's good. Good question. Thank you. Yes.
The interesting thing to me about this lesson was that it follows 5 weeks of creedal examination. And it doesn't have anything to do with creedal examination. And it has something to do with hope,
Mhm.
which is not creedal.
Mhm.
It is ubiquitous. After 9/11, within days after 9/11, I was moved to write words to a song, which I wound up calling Ode to Hope. And I hope to be able to sing it
Oh.
2 weeks from today at the 8:30 service. And it speaks to the need for everyone to recognize our oneness and that our hope is in love. I call it the love of God, but God is sometimes a disunifying word. Buddhists don't believe in God, but it doesn't keep them from being religious. Anyway, hope is very important, and it was important at 9/11, and it's become another round of the same thing with Ukraine and
Right.
Israel and Gaza.
Yes. Another hard question.
Yeah, I was pleased that you talked about action coming from hope. Because at the beginning of the lesson, I was thinking still about people coming out of slavery who were passive and we just hope for the world to come. And there's really nothing we can do. And that mindset and how it developed into some bit of conflict in the civil rights movement as to what you do and how active you should be. But then I'm thinking, still, what do people do who are being bombed? Where do you find hope in that situation?
I know. I have no answers for that.
Yeah.
That's difficult stuff.
Eric Shelter.
Yes. Yeah.
So I love everything you presented, and hope for thing with feathers and radical hope as it's a sure thing and it's hope, but and it's okay if you don't want to go this direction today. But I was actually talking with a friend last week and we were talking about false hope, right? And I've had many conversations with people who, right, they prayed and believed that, oh, they're gonna get together with their spouses, and then it never happens, right? And then having conversation and dialogue with them, it's like, in their minds, it was a false hope, right? They were believing and hoping and praying, and it didn't happen. And that's how this person's, phrased it as a false hope. And so I just wonder, like, how can we hold in dichotomy or tension? Because we're human beings, right? God's a God of love, right? Wherever, however love is defined, whether it's within culture, whether it's within families, friends, like, how can we incorporate the tension and dichotomy that exists within radical hope and distinguish when it can become sort of a false hope and lead us astray when we believe our intentions are good?
What's powerful for me in this whole story of radical hope is you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You have the promise that it's going to be good, and I think sometimes we already know what the outcome we want is going to be, and that uncertainty is so hard that to live with that and know that it's going to take some time. That's a tough one.
Well, thank you, Ed, and I like that you addressed the uncertainty of it all, because
Yeah.
sometimes, right, we want the outcome, like we're praying for hope, but it's a certain outcome we're hoping to attain, as opposed to living in the moment with the uncertainty in hope and maybe faith, to your point, Joanne.
My fisherman friend in Washington County, the result of the cultural devastation that I experienced my whole life, especially with young people, was drugs and alcohol and babies. And everybody kept saying, well, we have to have education, we have to do this, we have to do that. The whole issue was there was no world that these people could embrace that gave them meaning in life. And so this guy gets up and talks about fishing forever. I said, that's it. That's it. Because these were once, very, very, people, they were proud people. They're great. They got stuff done. And again, it's hard for us to imagine what it's like to go through that kind of devastation, where everything the bottom just totally drops out.
Hope works when you accept responsibility.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah. And be honest, part of what I was trying to talk about is it's not being Pollyanna, it's just facing the reality of that's out there. It's not saying, oh, it's something else. That's hard to do.
I think Emily had her, I saw her.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I'm just gonna comment about the difference between hope and expectation.
Mhm.
Because I think when you have like false, just what I.
false hope is,
That's just because there's an expectation with it. To me, hope is a little bit untethered. There is a hope that the community can come back. What that is, we don't know, but we are hopeful that a new can come.
Yeah.
And being open to the unknown as opposed to putting your expectation up. And it will be a high-tech industry that's going to come in and get jobs.
Right.
Or I'm going to get back with my spouse, or I'm going to get the dream job. Sometimes not getting the dream job is the thing that needed to come into space, but you've got to have that space to open up. So I think there's a difference between hope and expectation.
And that word despair is, that this guy talks about despair over and over. He said, that is what leads to death. And that sense of being cut off from what, as he says, the vision of who we are as a people. When you don't have that, you're really lost. So, yeah.
I think you have to also see the flexibility of the whole thing. It
Mhm.
cannot be like you just said, what your expectations are. You have to be okay, what's gonna happen? And that's very hard. Just
Right.
whatever comes has to be, you have to adjust it
Right.
to what you want.
This guy, the chief, Pliniku, he came to Washington in 1920, towards the end of his life. And he went to the tomb of the unknown soldier, and he laid down his coup stick at the foot of him and said, "We are done with that." That's pretty powerful. And then, but again, he had the sense of what that's not it for us. We'll become something, but it's not gonna be that. So, yeah.
Just one other comment about, with family and friends over the years, the thing I hear from them is, gee, I've lost faith. Life is just, something's happened personally or otherwise, they've lost, that's what they use the term faith. And I say to them, you never lose your faith, you've lost hope.
Mhm.
And that's where our activity and responsibility comes in.
I wish we had a 20-year-old in this group right now to give an opinion on this.
I know, it'd be good, wouldn't it?
It'd be a different.
Yeah.
Well, they're very positive, it's 20.
I can speak to that, right?
Yeah.
50 doesn't count.
Put your hat on there.
Yes, sir.
Year-old's opinion.
I was
what's your
gonna
opinion? Yeah.
confirm what you said. I used to volunteer doing taxes and I could never understand. Well, I started off with H&R Block. I got training there, but I hated the organization. But we would have people come in that were very poor and they take all these ridiculous options that H&R Block used to throw at them to get their money faster or something. And I asked a banker once, why do poor people just throw their money away? And he said, because they never intend to materialize anything. It's, we look after our money thinking we'll grow one of these days, but unfortunately, those people are just just lost in that sense.
Yeah, Patrick, please.
This is a very specific thing. The poem, there was something about the bird to the soul. Was that in the poem?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that line for me?
Oh, you needed a handout.
Yeah, I don't have that sheet, I'm sorry.
It's-
So it is
All
the
people.
Hope is the thing with feathers that
Oh.
perches in the soul
soul.
and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all.
Were you making it, I mean, the connection there with the chickadee? Is that something you were thinking about and putting that together?
No, I'm not that clever.
Uh,
But it's there. But I like the fact that, as Dickinson says, it comes from outside us.
Yeah.
That's why I worked really hard to figure this out. It just kind of, just
It arrives.
it arrives.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Okay, worship is really good today. Very, very, very moving. So, good. Thank you all. Go in peace.
Thank you.